All right, man, peace. So, brothers, in the aftermath of socially woke superhero Colin Kaepernick being revealed to be what I've told you he's always been, that being a corporate asset, particularly of Nike Incorporated, this is going to display the true sentiment of big bank take little bank, because all this is corporate warfare at its finest. Now that the NFL and President Donald Trump understand to a degree exactly how much power Colin Kaepernick now has because of who he's associated with, they're going to have to recalibrate how they approach this entire situation. And that means what? They're going to have to lay in the weeds in regards to any overt attacks against Colin Kaepernick. Because when you're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Nike, they have as much prestige, they have as much sway with the media and even with the courts as a Donald Trump or even an NFL. So once again, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Colin Kaepernick is now the face of Nike's iconic 30th anniversary Just Do It campaign. Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing anything. The NFL released a statement on Kaepernick and social justice in light of the Nike campaign. Here it is. The National Football League believes in dialogue, understanding, and unity. We embrace the role and responsibility of everyone involved with this game to promote meaningful, positive change in our communities. The social justice issues that Colin and other professional athletes have raised deserve our attention and action.
So, brothers, as we can see, the NFL is taking a much more conciliatory tone in regards to Colin Kaepernick and the alleged issues that he claims to stand for. But as I've already noted in the previous videos that I've done on this topic, the commercial that he had or was featured in regards to Nike had nothing to do with his platform. It was all about globalism and the unification of quote-unquote all races, and making sure that Nike firmly implants in the minds of the viewer that Colin Kaepernick is a martyr-like figure, that he's a hero, that he's a shepherd to be followed. That truly is what the Colin Kaepernick experiment is all about. Once again, it is to socially engineer society by first socially engineering the NFL. And they're already starting to systematically break the NFL down. Because once you get a mega corporation like the NFL to start to take conciliatory tones in regards to how they speak about you or what you claim to represent, it's only a matter of time before they start to implement new protocols, new methods of operation. So we'll see what happens from here.
Action. Serena Williams, also a Nike athlete. The company just showed
Nike athlete and Nike asset. Serena Williams, that's what she is, or he is. Allegedly.
Showed their support of her with a campaign responding to the French Open banning her outfit moving forward. Here's Serena.
Well, I mean, he's done a lot for, the African American community.
That's very interesting, Serena Williams. What exactly has Colin Kaepernick done for the so-called African American community? Let me guess. He's brought attention to police brutality. That's normally the response that I get from a lot of so-called pro-blacks or liberal blacks or woke blacks, that Colin Kaepernick is quote-unquote bringing attention to what's going on in the so-called black community in regards to quote-unquote police brutality. So I'm guessing that you truly believe that the other races are not aware that the police tend to take a stronger stance when it comes to their dealings with so-called black people. I don't think that anyone would deny that there is an element of police brutality when it comes to so-called blacks. It's just that the other races don't particularly care, because their attitude is, whether right or wrong, that so-called black people do not conduct themselves in a manner befitting good treatment from the police. So once again, the methodology of the so-called pro-black or liberal black is to seek pity from the other races, or to seek attention, quote-unquote, which is what a child does. A child seeks attention. When you say that Colin Kaepernick is bringing attention to something, you're saying that he's utilizing juvenile tactics. And that's not something that's going to work in the long run. But beyond that, please understand, Serena Williams is a Nike asset. She is never going to come against what Nike's doing. Even if she had the intellect to understand what truly was going on, which I don't believe that she does. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact she doesn't. But even if she did have the intellect to understand what was going on in regards to Nike's manipulation of the quote-unquote consciousness of so-called black people, she would not speak against them, because she knows where her bread is buttered. But once again, brothers, just pay very close attention. The liberal black female, here she is, or he is, or whatever. And I know a lot of people going to get mad at me saying that. It is what it is. Here we have Serena Williams, married to a Caucasian man, has a child with a Caucasian man, but she can still get to be woke. Isn't that amazing? I would have a hard time imagining a so-called affluent and prominent black male athlete, so-called black male athlete, who could still be considered woke despite having a Caucasian wife and having a child with that woman. But the liberal black female, she can still get to be woke. And I know that for a fact because there's still many so-called black males who get upset whenever I put the scope on Serena Williams. They get very upset, even though she's made it very clear that she has no interest in you at all. Not in any form of substantive way. Once again, her and her sister, said many years ago that once a so-called black woman achieves a certain amount of success, she either has to become a lesbian or deal with a Caucasian man. Now, of course, in the aftermath of that interview being exposed, they both denied that they were actually interviewed and that they made those statements. But their actions have shown over the past 15 years that they adhere to that premise, that they believe that they have to be with a Caucasian man once they get to a certain level of success, despite the fact that their father is the one who put the tennis racket in their hand in the first place. So isn't that so amazing? So many liberal black females run all across the internet talking about your mother this and what about your mother and you must not love your mother. Does Serena Williams love her dad? The person who put the tennis racket in her hand and who made her the success that she is.
And it's cost him a lot. And, it's sad, but he continues to...
Yeah, it's so sad. It's cost Colin Kaepernick so much. He's still living in a high-level apartment in New York City, being subsidized by numerous liberal sponsors, and now Nike has decided to come out of the shadows and acknowledge that they're one of his sponsors. It's so sad what's happening to Colin Kaepernick. What a terrible story.
Do the best that he can to support, and having a huge company back him, through... it could be a controversial reason for this company, but they're not afraid, and I feel...
What exactly does Nike have to be afraid of? As you've already stated, they're a $120 billion company. They have nothing to lose. Nothing. As a matter of fact, what we should be trying to analyze is what do they have to gain by aligning themselves with Colin Kaepernick? Because it's certainly not finance. At least not in the aftermath of what I'm sure is going to be an initial boost in sales. Down the line, what exactly do they have to gain other than helping to subsidize an ideological movement?
I feel like that was a really powerful statement to a lot of other companies.
All right, President Trump also weighed in on this issue, saying, I think it's a terrible message that they're sending and the purpose of them doing it. Maybe there's a reason for them doing it, but
Well, Donald Trump, you already know that there's a reason for them doing it, and I believe that Donald Trump is starting to imply, or at least to suspect, that there's something rotten in Denmark in regards to why a multi-billion-dollar company will want to publicly align themselves with Colin Kaepernick. I mean, let's be for real. It's not because of selling power.
yeah, but I think as far as sending a message, I think it's a terrible message and a message that shouldn't be sent. There's no reason for it. As much as I disagree with the Colin Kaepernick endorsement in another way, I wouldn't have done it. In another way, it is what this country is all about, that you have certain freedoms to do things that other people think you shouldn't do. But I personally am on a different side of it.
Now, once again, brothers, do you notice the conciliatory tone of both the NFL and Donald Trump? Of course, the NFL is far more conciliatory in their tone than Donald Trump is. But once again, let's keep in mind that there is a collusion case on the horizon between Colin Kaepernick and the NFL. And there is a possibility that there may be some Donald Trump tweets or phone calls that he made to prominent owners in the NFL, letting them know that they should not get involved in the Colin Kaepernick project. Maybe he's starting to sense that this whole situation may be bigger than he may have first suspected. And he's saying to himself right now, well, wait a minute. I made a call to Jerry Jones last year. I made a call to Robert Kraft last year. I made a call to a couple of other owners last year. to pick their brain in regards to the Kaepernick situation. And it's a possibility that my name may come up in this case because of certain phone calls that they tracked down. Who knows? I guess we'll find out.
Stephen A., a lot of voices there. What's your reaction to the latest?
Well, first of all, I want to applaud Serena Williams and LeBron James, who was honored last night in, Harlem Fashion Row.
Yes, that idiot LeBron James was honored at Harlem Fashion Row, and he made his appearance with his cut-off slacks and his blazer on, holding his daughter up in his arms and saying, when asked a question about Colin Kaepernick, I side with Nike. I side with anyone who's involved with change. Yes, because you're a prostitute for Nike Incorporated. That's what you are. As is Kaepernick, as is Serena Williams, as is Tiger Woods, who also came out in support of the ad. Because it's all about the money. It's all about the corporate affinity. It has nothing to do with any type of real cause of substance. And you guys are going to come to find out that LeBron James, all he is the basketball version of Lance Armstrong. That's all he is. He's a great athlete, but you guys are going to find out, man.
For speaking out on behalf of Colin Kaepernick the way that they did. And I take it from the standpoint and the angle that you are a prominent African-American athlete, a global iconic figure in the case of LeBron James and Serena Williams, who I believe, if she were a man, we'd be calling her the greatest who ever lived as an athlete.
Well, I got news for you, Stephen A. Smith, that you need to call her the greatest that ever lived. Because if the only thing stopping that is if she was a man, then ain't nothing stopping it.
An athlete, considering her level of accomplishments, the sustained level of excellence spanning 2 decades that she has put forth, in chasing Margaret Court's all-time, Grand Slam record and what have you. We know.
Isn't that amazing? I mentioned that in a very controversial video that I did a long time ago in regards to Billie Jean King, implying that Serena Williams is not the greatest tennis player ever. Serena Williams is not the record holder in regards to what female tennis player has won the most singles tournaments. She is not. It is Margaret Court. But could you imagine the upheaval, the rancor, the anger amongst liberal black females if Margaret Court had been a black woman and Serena Williams was a Caucasian woman, and they were calling Serena Williams the greatest tennis player of all time, and she did not even have that record? Once again, so-called black man, you have to understand something about the liberal black woman. They are not your friend. Okay? Once again, they have 3 altars. They have the globalist altar, which we're seeing right now in regards to Nike Incorporated. They have the racialist altar, where they try to act as if they're concerned with their own people and their own race, but for the most part, it's not anything of substance. It's not anything real. But number 1 is the feminist altar. That's all you have to know about the liberal black woman, and 95% of these black women are liberal. That's the bottom line of it.
We know what Serena brings to the table. But when you look at Serena and you know about LeBron, these are 2 individuals that have accomplished a great deal and have accumulated a level of wealth. So the level of fear that a lot of people could have and should not be applicable to them.
Thank you, sir, for understanding that. You touched on that in a previous video that I did on this topic. And I think that it's very important for people to grasp this, because I've mentioned this sentiment in previous videos when a lot of these clowns, they try to talk about why athletes in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, they did not speak out about race as much. At least starting from the late 70s, where you started to have that more globalist mentality. And then into the 80s and 90s when it became more corporate. You have to understand that many of the prominent athletes at that time were creating the paradigms that are utilized by athletes today, and have been taken up to a whole other level today. In other words, it's much easier to be woke today, because what exactly are you sacrificing? You actually get rewarded for provoking anarchy. Back in the 80s, you would not have been. You would have been totally disenfranchised. Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas, Patrick Ewing, Jerry Rice, Mike Tyson, had they spoken with the level of fervor that many of these athletes act as if they speak with today in regards to racial issues, they would have been totally disenfranchised. And it basically would have been them cutting off their nose to spite their face. And we've all lived through situations like this. Some of you have had parents who worked excessive hours at jobs they didn't like to make a better life for you. And that's how you have to look at what many of those athletes did from the 60s, 70s, 80s onward. No, they could not be as verbose. They could not be as overt in regards to their displeasure and regarding certain racial issues. Number one, because maybe they understood that they did not understand what they were so upset about in completion, and they wanted greater understanding before they could speak about it. Maybe they separated what they did from politics, and maybe they were just not willing to sacrifice their financial stability for that. And you have to have a certain level of understanding, especially when overall our people don't have a plan and tend to not have a plan. So when you have an athlete like a LeBron James or a Serena Williams who act as if they're so socially conscious, they have nothing to lose. The problem is, once again, in my view of it, the issue is not that they're speaking out. They have the right to speak out, but at least be informed and at least have a plan. And they don't have a plan and they're not informed. And what you do when you don't have a plan and you speak is that you mislead people. You emotionally inflame them, and they have to let out all that excessive energy in a certain way. And for the most part, that energy release is not going to be constructive. It's going to be destructive.
You cannot, LeBron James does not have to make another dime, and he is set for generations. With what he has accomplished and the wealth that he has accumulated, there is no reason to fear. And so when you are quiet and you have that kind of cachet and that kind of cushion, but you're still fearful, it doesn't get much weaker than that. That is not LeBron James. That is not Serena Williams in this particular situation. And I applaud them for...
Well, this is where you and I diverge, Stephen A. Smith, because they're speaking not from a courageous perspective. They're speaking from the understanding that Nike's going to have their back. It's like somebody who's talking tough because they got their whole crew behind them. I mean, how courageous exactly is it? And it's not all about courage. I stated this in another video. It's not all about you having the quote-unquote balls to speak your mind. As a man, you also should have a very strong thought process behind what you're saying. That's why I've stated in regards to Muhammad Ali made certain racial statements, but at least his platform was the Nation of Islam. What is LeBron James's platform? His platform is globalism. He is not as big a black nationalist as he's trying to make himself out to be. All of that is corporate brand building. I've been telling you brothers this for a very long time. The Colin Kaepernick experiment is more corporate brand building for himself, really in an attempt to legitimize a lot of the Marxist ideologies that they're trying to spread into the NFL. So Nike is legitimizing Colin Kaepernick by acting as a co-signator for him. So, of course, LeBron James and Serena Williams are going to co-sign even further. Remember that Nike has a platform of equality. They've been trying to push that for the last year and change. And they've been able to galvanize a lot of their quote-unquote woke athletes with that. So they don't question Nike at this point. They don't care, because everybody stands to make money off of being woke.
Saying what they said. As it pertains to the president, I could care less. His words were predictable. We understand where he's coming from. We understand.
Do you really understand where he's coming from, Stephen A. Smith, or do you just want to act like you do?
Understand why he says what he says, and my issue on that has always been the same. He hijacked the issue. If they were excoriating Colin Kaepernick for his position on racial oppression, racial inequality, police brutality, and that was what they were focused on, then it would be subject for discussion and debate. But the fact that folks have been allowed to try and turn it into something that it is not, which is an issue of patriotism, is just...
Well, Stephen A. Smith, here's my contention in regards to your claim that Donald Trump hijacked what the actual debate was about. Colin Kaepernick had the opportunity to refocus what the actual discussion should be about in his Nike commercial, as did Nike, and they refused to do so. In the commercial, there was no imagery of police brutality. They had an opportunity to show a lot of the black men who've been shot, quote unquote, innocently by the cops. They didn't do that. All the imagery was them trying to correlate Colin Kaepernick as being an inspiration for children who want to do something, right? Just do it. Once again, that is the credo. It's not stop police brutality. It's just do it. So both Nike and Colin Kaepernick confirmed that Colin Kaepernick's purpose has very little to do with his actual claim that he's against police brutality against so-called black men. He had the opportunity to take back control of the narrative. He did not do that. Why is that? So we just can't keep going around trying to blame Donald Trump for everything. Nowadays, a nigga lose his job, his girlfriend leave him, it's Donald Trump's fault. No, sir. I'm not buying that.
It's just an evasive tactic that I think has fooled millions of people who were looking for an excuse to hate on somebody anyway, and they found it. In the end, LeBron and Serena softened the blow of that, because what they've done is provide cushion for the Colin Kaepernick supporters of the world and for the Nike supporters of the world, highlighting that this is the right thing to do, or to use Max's words from yesterday, being on the right side of history.
Well, LeBron James and Serena Williams, they don't have the power or the clout to cushion anything. Nike does not need them to cushion anything. At the end of the day, they do what Nike wants them to do. So it's actually Nike who's cushioning them.
Yeah, what we're seeing here, reflected on the one hand by Trump's statement, which I agree with Stephen A. This is transparently an appeal to his base. Although at least this time he said, hey, this is America, you can do what you want.
That is true.
Right.
That is true.
And Serena saying, I support this. What we're seeing is the division that has been roiling our politics being reflected in the sports world as a...
Right, and that's why you guys are so happy about it, because all of you guys on ESPN are very frustrated political pundits. But once again, I think that that's going to come to an end very soon. Because even though First Take has very high ratings, and that's basically the only reason why they're the only show on ESPN that's still allowed to talk about politics, I think that eventually the new director of ESPN is going to let it be known, you guys are talking a little bit too much about politics. And you're going to have to simmer it down. Because after a while, I think that it's going to start to become so obvious what the actual reason is for Nike co-signing Colin Kaepernick that they're going to look foolish continuing on in this narrative. Once again, eventually the truth always comes to light. And the manipulation tactics that they have constantly used on the so-called black man, the mega corporations I'm talking about, it's going to start to reveal themselves more and more.
As it were. And what is that division? On the one hand, you have a camp that has, Trump's base, that voted for him as a monolith, meaning all like lockstep. Mm-hmm. Older white people. And by the way, I'm generalizing, of course, but you can't talk about large groups of people without making some generalizations. It doesn't mean every older white person voted for Trump, or a younger person of color doesn't want to stand for the national anthem. I'm not saying that, but we're talking about what's underneath here, fundamentally what's going on. Trump's base, who he's appealing to, are older white people who have benefited from a status quo which confers upon them privilege that's meritless. It's just based on your race and your, in some cases, your...
No, sir. No, sir. Actually, the so-called white privilege, and this is a term that many woke blacks like to use to sound informed or to sound quote-unquote conscious, all white privilege is the ability to say that we have rulership. And this is a concept that many so-called black people struggle with because our people do not have a ruling class mentality. There's no such thing as so-called white supremacy today. What we're living in is quote-unquote white rulership, because the timeline of this society proceeds in a sequence of kingdoms, of rulerships. And right now we're nearing the tail end of this current rulership. So that's why it's really incumbent upon the so-called black man to start prepping his own mindset for rulership, as opposed to trying to appeal for so-called equality, because all you're doing when you appeal for equality is you're saying, so-called white man, I love your rulership, I just want to be a part of it. When you really should be saying, I want my own, I want to do my own, I want to rule my own, I want to have my own. And that's very difficult for a lot of our people to wrap their head around, but they use these terms like white privilege and white supremacy. And really, when you use that term, all you're telling the so-called white man is, I look at you as being above me. Now, do we expect certain preferential treatment in the court system, so on and so forth? Of course. And by the way, as long as you continue to maintain a lot of the corporate designations that you accept of being black and African American and a minority, urban, all these terms that you adhere to and that you accept, you're going to perpetuate the mentality that you're nothing but a financial asset to be bartered and traded and used as they want. Our people have to start thinking forward, right? In a far more forward method of thinking so that we don't continuously get caught up in the same traps and the same nonsense. And we have to let go of that victimization mentality. But once again, what is white privilege? All white privilege is the so-called white man in his society making sure that they preserve their own, and they have the right to do that. What we have to do is show privilege towards ourselves and each other by making sure that we hold each other on that same high standard and on that same pedestal as the Caucasian holds their own, and how, unfortunately, how we hold them. So the concept of white privilege is a us problem. It's not a them problem. They're doing what they're supposed to do. We're not. And I'm not quite sure if our people are going to understand that anytime soon.
Your gender, right? And that's who he is talking to. And who is Serena Williams reflecting? Serena Williams is reflecting groups who have come in from the margins. She is a woman of color. These are
allegedly.
She's reflecting the sensibilities of the multiracial coalition that opposed Trump's base.
Hey, brother, didn't I tell you that the situation in Charlottesville, all that was white trash on one side going up against an amalgamation of of refuse, liberal black females and simp black males, homosexuals, lesbians, transgenders, etc. That's why you should not have been emotionally triggered at all with what occurred in Charlottesville that day. That was trash going up against trash.
Which is more reflected in the youth culture than with older people. This is to whom Nike primarily is going to sell their wares. That's to whom they are trying to appeal. But fundamentally, the debate is between one side who says, we want things the way they are because we benefit from the status quo, or better yet, the way they used to be because we benefited even more, and another side that's saying, wait a minute, everyone wants to come into this. We're
Ding. Thank you, Max Kellerman. Once again, so-called black men, what is it that you think that you're saying when you say that you want to be equal to people who oppress you? You're saying that you want to be an oppressor alongside of them. You're not saying that you want to be free and liberated. You're saying that I want to be aligned with you so I could be like you. When you say that you want to be equal to someone or something, you're saying that you want to be them. That's really all you're saying. You're not saying that you want an equal chance. Because why would you expect a certain group to give you an equal chance when you're not a member of that group? We have to look forward to trying to give each other an equal chance. When the Asian man comes here, he doesn't tell the Caucasian, I want you to give me an equal chance. He looks around at the other Asians and they say, this is what we're going to do because we're coming from a basis, a platform of power. And that's the real problem. That's the real conundrum. The so-called black man is struggling to figure out what his power base should be. Our power base has to be a strong culture. Right? The culture is the scriptures. We have to turn back to the Most High. Because that's how we're going to have good success. That's going to teach us how to discipline ourselves and one another. And that's the real issue at hand. All these things that we see on television are just a smokescreen, but it's important to be cognizant of the energies, the storylines, the narratives that they're putting forth, because through those narratives, we learn how to dissect their thought process. You always want to learn how your enemy thinks. Why would you not want to know how your enemy thinks? When you understand how they think, then you can predict what their actions are going to be. You can intercept them, no pun intended. Right? All these type of things we have to be cognizant of. And when it comes to Mr. Colin Kaepernick, it's very obvious to me that he's basically playing the role of a double agent.
We want to do this together. And if that means that the NFL, which was, this is where I want to end up the point, Stephen A. The NFL was a shared experience once upon a time, or so it seemed. In a world where there's not just, there's a proliferation of media, and so everyone's attention is everywhere. On Monday nights, let's say, everyone, 50 million, however many people, millions of people, are all watching the NFL. And in a time where we time shift things and we're not sharing everything at the same time, everyone's watching it together. So there's this sense that the NFL is the one place that's unifying. But it turns out, and Kaepernick's protest showed this, maybe not everyone felt the way that the people who Trump is talking to felt.
Here's my thing.
Or maybe what Kaepernick represented was an attempt to throw off that sense of unification that the NFL had intended to bring to the United States public at large. Once again, Mr. Colin Kaepernick is an agent of chaos. He's not going anywhere anytime soon.
I think.
And Serena's reflecting that.
Here's my deal. I don't like when people, I will say this, I don't have a problem with their position. But I'm not enamored with the notion that we're standing with Nike. Stand with Colin Kaepernick. Let's not sit up there and act.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, to stand with Colin Kaepernick is to stand with Nike because Nike owns him, or at least a part of him. This person is not a real person, Colin Kaepernick, and I'm not quite sure if a lot of brothers understand this. He is a monarch athlete. He's someone to be controlled, to be utilized as an asset. That is all he is. Same thing with LeBron, same thing with Serena, same thing with Tiger Woods. They will do whatever Nike tells them to do. They're proverbially speaking, they're like Treadstone in the Jason Bourne saga. They're like Treadstone or Blackbriar. They have to come back to home base. Whatever Phil Knight tells them, that is what they do. And that goes all the way back to Michael Jordan. Whatever Phil Knight says, that's what Michael does. Bottom line.
And act like Nike, really stepped out on a limb here. The reality is that if you really wanted to step out on a limb, you're about a year and a half late to the party. Because Nike could have been taking this position. Now, obviously, it wasn't the 30th year to commemorate the just.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, when you send your agent, when you send your operative out to perform a hit, you trust them to be able to execute that hit. Now, if they mess up in any way, then you have to send a cleanup crew. And that's all this is. Nike's been sent out to clean up this whole mess because Kaepernick was unsuccessful. So now by them publicly aligning themselves with him, that once again re-legitimizes him.
Just do a campaign, and I get all of that. But they could have taken this position much, much earlier. That's number one. Number two, what I will say that I applaud and I appreciate that nobody has brought up about Nike is that it's one thing for Trump to attack NFL players. It's another thing to attack Phil Knight. If there's anybody that could stand up to President Trump.
Ding, you're finally making a real point, Stephen A. Smith.
It would be Phil Knight. He has the cachet. Now, this is an individual. You talk about Knight.
And I guarantee you this, brother. Phil Knight and Donald Trump, they know one another very well. All of these guys, they move in the same circles. They've been on the same yachts. They've been to the same islands. They've participated in the same sacrifices. I guarantee you that. They know one another very well.
Nike that has rented space at on Trump's properties, which is what the president pointed out. But Nike's planning on moving out and moving to a new location on Fifth Avenue come 2019. So they're definitely going to be away from that. But in the end, what I'm saying is that if you are a Phil Knight, basically you're roaming in the same circles. You're communicating with some similar people. And more importantly, you have the muscle and the cachet to offset.
In other words, Nike has the resources to go to war. And that's why I stated at the start of this video. Just please pay very close attention to the increased conciliatory tone in the NFL statements, as well as in Donald Trump's statement, because they understand what's going on here. At least they're starting to understand what's going on here. That Colin Kaepernick is not just a dude who was taking a knee. That there are certain factions and sponsors behind him, and they've been behind him from the very start, as I've been telling you, brothers, from the very start.
What Trump will not only throw in the direction of Nike, but what he would throw in the direction of the National Football League. So if you are the National Football League, this is a good thing, actually, because even though Nike did not make them aware of what the intent was and what they were doing, they didn't give them a heads up. Supposedly, the NFL found out on Monday like everybody else. If you're the NFL, think about this for a second here. Nike is an incredibly powerful and potent brand. Phil Knight is an iconic figure in and of his own right. They garner a level of support and muscle. If you combine that with the National Football League, it might serve to assist you in warding off whatever vitriol the president comes at you with down the line in the days and weeks to come. Because when those games tip off, if the president is true to form, he's going to have something to say, even if it's for evasive measures. He's going to have something to say while the football games are being played. And the NFL looked helpless last year in doing so. That might not be the case now that you got Nike's muscle supporting them.
Of the problem.
Right, but is Nike truly supporting the NFL owners? Or is Nike meant to act as a pincer, the other portion of a pincer, with Donald Trump on one side and them on the other, providing control opposition so that they can socially engineer the NFL. What really is going on here, Stephen A. Smith? Because there's no doubt that Nike's going to add a component. They're going to add an element to this whole social engineering paradigm or protocol, program per se, that's being enacted on the NFL. That's going to eventually result in major change.